On a quiet night in the nearly empty boardroom, Clara James bent over the long oak table, the soft swish of her cloth breaking the silence. She was exhausted, thinking about the homework she still needed to help her son finish, when a deep voice startled her. "Sorry, I didn't know someone was in here." She turned to see a tall black man in the doorway, one hand raised in apology. His crisp shirt and polished shoes didn't match the cleaning crew's uniform, yet there was something unpretentious in his demeanor. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said, picking up a spare cloth from her cart. "Just started today. Figured I'd help." Clara arched a brow. New hires rarely volunteered for late-night chores. Still, they worked side by side, the city lights casting silver reflections across the glass walls. As they cleaned, Daniel spoke of the kind of mess you can't see: office politics, broken promises, and how people like her often went unnoticed. His words struck a nerve. Clara had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, but life's hardships had placed her here, invisible to most. Yet Daniel's tone carried no pity, only recognition. Before leaving, he told her, "This company doesn't need another slogan. It needs people like you, people who care." Clara didn't know who Daniel really was, but for the first time in years, someone had made her feel truly seen. What began as a simple exchange over cleaning supplies would ignite a connection that neither of them could have predicted, a spark that would challenge not just Clara's view of herself, but the way an entire company valued those in its shadows. Late Friday night, Clara James wheeled her cleaning cart onto the top floor, expecting only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the familiar smell of lemon polish. She'd been assigned to tidy the boardroom after an executive meeting, a task she usually did without a second thought. But the moment she pushed open the heavy double doors, her body went rigid. At the head of the long mahogany table stood Daniel Carter, the man she'd met just days ago, the one who had picked up a cloth and helped her wipe chairs without a hint of condescension. Only now, he wasn't in rolled-up sleeves and a loosened tie. He was dressed in a sleek, tailored suit, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His voice was steady, commanding, and carried easily over the polished table as a dozen sharply dressed executives listened. Clara froze in the doorway, mop handle clenched in her hand. Daniel's eyes flickered toward her, just for a second. His words faltered ever so slightly before he straightened his shoulders and continued. "Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm your new CEO." The room went still. Clara felt heat rush to her face, but her feet stayed planted. Daniel's gaze swept the table before landing on her again. "Before stepping into this role, I wanted to see this company from a different vantage point, not from spreadsheets and profit margins, but from the people who keep it alive. People who work after hours. People who rarely get invited to meetings, yet carry the weight of this place every day." Gasps rippled through the room. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to melt into the floor. "I met one of them my first night here," Daniel continued, his voice warmer now. "She showed me more about this company's values than any report ever could. She reminded me what dignity looks like." His eyes held hers in a way that made her feel both exposed and honored at once. Clara slipped out before the applause began, the sound of her sneakers soft against the plush carpet. In the elevator, she leaned against the mirrored wall, struggling to steady her breath. The man she'd spoken to about being invisible, the man who'd listened without judgment, was the CEO. And he had seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one in 8 years at this job ever had. But Monday morning brought whispers that cut through the air like paper. She got special treatment. She's seducing the boss. Favoritism. By lunchtime, her supervisor reassigned her to the sub-level storage floors, cold, dim, and isolated. The unspoken punishment was clear. And Daniel? He didn't appear once that week. Clara told herself she didn't care, but each night, as she scrubbed concrete floors in silence, she found herself straining for the sound of his footsteps. A week later, she was on her knees polishing a scuffed tile when a pair of expensive dress shoes entered her line of sight. Without looking up, she muttered, "You're not supposed to be down here. And you're not supposed to be treated this way," came Daniel's reply. Her head snapped up. He knelt beside her, his suit immaculate against the grime of the floor. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I let them push me into silence, for optics, for politics. I should have spoken sooner." "You lied to me," Clara said, her voice low but sharp. "I didn't lie," Daniel countered. "I just wasn't ready to be seen." I needed to understand the bang-bang heart of this place before they packaged me into a press release. Her jaw tightened. And now that you've seen it? Now, he said, meeting her eyes, I know exactly what needs fixing. Starting with how people like you are treated. He extended his hand. Will you come with me? Something in his tone, a mix of resolve and humility, made her pause. Slowly, she placed her hand in his, letting him pull her to her feet. Instead of heading upstairs, he led her outside, into the crisp night air, where a black SUV idled. I want to show you something, Daniel said. They drove to a small brick building on a quiet street, its windows glowing warmly. Inside, volunteers served hot meals while children hunched over homework at makeshift desks. This was my mother's dream, Daniel explained. She was a janitor, raised 3 boys on a minimum wage. She passed before I could finish building the first center. I knew when I met you that what you represent should never be invisible. Clara's throat tightened as she took in the scene, the laughter, the shared meals, the safe light, in children's eyes. For the first time, she realized Daniel hadn't just been playing a role when they met. He had been looking for someone who understood that true value wasn't measured by titles or suits, but by presence, compassion, and quiet persistence. On the way back, they didn't speak much. When they arrived at her apartment, she stepped out without saying goodbye, her emotions too tangled to untie in a single moment. Yet as she walked upstairs, one truth settled in her chest, like a steady flame. She might not yet know where this strange connection would lead, but she knew Daniel Carter had changed the way she saw herself. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. The following Monday, Daniel Carter stood in the center of the company's glass-walled atrium, the air buzzing with anticipation. Employees from every department, engineers in pressed shirts, cafeteria workers, still in aprons, janitors with mop handles, leaning against the bar wall, stood shoulder to shoulder as cameras and smartphones pointed toward him. Clara. James lingered near the back, hoping to stay unnoticed. When I joined this company, Daniel began, I didn't come in with a title, a suit, or a corner office. I came to see this place from the ground up. I wanted to meet the people who keep it alive, not in boardrooms, but in back halls and late shifts. His gaze swept the crowd before stopping, inevitably, on her. One of those people is here today, he continued, his voice carrying a note of emotion that made Clara's chest tighten. Clara James has taught me more about leadership than any consultant ever could, about humility, dignity, and the quiet strength that too often goes unnoticed. Today, we're launching Step Forward, an initiative to provide scholarships, family support, and expanded benefits to our frontline staff. The atrium erupted in applause, but Clara's cheeks burned. She wasn't used to being named in public, let alone in front of executives. As the clapping swelled, she quietly slipped away, retreating to the safety of a service corridor. By the next day, the whispers had shifted tone. In the break room, 2 supervisors leaned close, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. She's got the CEO wrapped around her finger, one muttered. Special treatment. Others weren't as subtle. Her locker was tagged in red marker with the words Gold Digger. By midweek, Clara's supervisor called her into a cramped office, his expression unreadable. We're moving you to the sub-level storage floors, he said flatly. Fewer distractions there. She understood the unspoken message. This was a punishment. Those cold, dim corridors had no windows, no human traffic, only the hum of old ventilation units and the smell of dust. Daniel didn't appear that week. Clara told herself it was better this way, distance would quiet the rumors. But as she scrubbed concrete floors alone, she found herself listening for footsteps she knew wouldn't come. Her mind replayed their earlier conversations. The way he'd spoken about invisible workers like they were the foundation, not the fringe. One Thursday night, as she knelt to buff a stubborn scuff from the linoleum, a shadow fell across her work. Polished leather shoes appeared in her peripheral vision. You're not supposed to be down here, she muttered without looking up. And you're not supposed to be treated this way, Daniel replied, his voice softer than she remembered. Clara straightened slowly, meeting his gaze. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, but there was a weariness in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They pushed me into silence, for optics, for politics, and I let them. I should have fought for you. You lied to me, she said, her tone edged with both hurt and disbelief. I didn't lie, I just wasn't ready to be seen. I needed to understand the heart of this place. Before they packaged me into a press release, he said, his voice steady. Her arms crossed instinctively. And now that you've seen it? What happens to people like me? That's what I'm here to change, he answered without hesitation. Then he extended his hand. Come with me. Against her better judgment, Clara placed her hand in his. He led her outside into the crisp night air where a black SUV idled. They drove in silence until they reached a modest brick building glowing warmly against the dark. Inside, volunteers served hot meals while children huddled over homework at folding tables. This was my mother's dream, Daniel explained. She was a janitor, raised 3 boys on minimum wage. She passed before I could open the first one. I knew when I met you that you represented what this place is about, strength that doesn't ask for recognition. Clara's throat tightened as she took in the scene. Here was a CEO who wasn't just making speeches. He had lived the life he claimed to value. But back at work, the reality was far from inspirational. The gossip worsened. Anonymous emails circulated about her past. How she dropped out of college, how her ex had been arrested, how she'd once applied for food stamps. When Daniel tried to reach out, she ignored his messages. Flowers arrived at her door. She returned them unopened. She needed space, not pity, not protection. Still, the initiative he'd launched began rolling forward. Scholarship applications came in. Family support stipends were approved. Frontline workers started to believe the promises might be real. Yet for Clara, every victory felt tinged with the weight of being the unspoken symbol and the unspoken target. Then, one evening, she returned to her locker to find a folded note taped to the door. There. Going to keep coming after you. Stay strong. It wasn't signed, but she knew the handwriting. Daniel was still watching, still fighting from the edges. And though she didn't yet know if she could fully trust him, one truth became harder to ignore. His public recognition had set something in motion. Not just a corporate program, but a shift in how people saw the invisible. For Clara James, that was both the connection she never expected and the challenge she couldn't escape. The first time Daniel Carter appeared at her apartment steps after weeks of silence, Clara James almost turned back inside. He was seated on the top stair, a small shoebox in his lap, covered in comic book stickers. Your son likes superheroes, right? He said. She hesitated, arms crossed. How did you? You told me, he said gently, back when I wasn't anybody important. Inside the box was not a toy, but a neatly folded letter of appointment and a proposal. Clara would serve as cultural advisor, a new role focused on building internal support programs for single parents and underrepresented staff. You don't owe me anything, she said. This isn't about owing, Daniel replied. It's about building something better with you. The next Monday, Clara stepped through the company's main lobby not in her janitor's uniform, but in a simple navy blouse and slacks, an ID badge clipped to her collar with the words advisory staff. Heads turned as she walked toward the elevators, and though her hands trembled, her chin stayed level. Her new office was modest, tucked beside HR, with a frosted glass door reading family support and culture advisor. On her desk sat a pot of daisies and a sticky note. You earned this, M. That first week, Clara's job was to listen. Staff from housekeeping, maintenance, and cafeteria. Services filed in cautiously, some skeptical, others eager. She offered tea, took notes, and asked questions no one had ever bothered to ask. What's missing for you at work? What would help your family feel supported? One evening, the night janitor, Eugene, stopped by. Been a long time since someone in a blouse asked me if my back was hurting, he said. Well, is it? She asked. Like hell, he chuckled, but it helps to be asked. The small interactions mattered. Over the following weeks, Clara began shaping initiatives. Childcare stipends for single parents, flexible scheduling for caregivers, and, most importantly, a monthly community coffee hour in the sunny South Atrium, where employees from every level could mingle without titles hanging over their heads. When the first coffee hour came, Clara arrived early to set up pastries and name tags. At 9:01 a.m., a maintenance worker walked in. By 9:15, over 60 people were gathered, supervisors chatting with janitors, interns laughing with kitchen staff. Daniel slipped in quietly near the end, leaning against the wall with a faint smile. He didn't speak, didn't make it about him, he simply watched, as if witnessing something sacred. But not everyone celebrated the changes. Certain executives saw her presence as disruptive, undermining traditional hierarchies. Clara overheard comments about sentimental leadership and soft priorities. Still, she pressed forward. When a junior executive confided in her about burnout, Clara invited her to the next coffee hour. When a cafeteria worker mentioned struggling with transportation, Clara helped coordinate a shuttle pilot program. Slowly, a web of connections spread through the building, not dictated by memos, but by trust. In private moments, Daniel admitted how much her work had shifted the atmosphere. "Sometimes I wonder how I led before you got here," he told her one night as they reviewed feedback forms. "You mean before I told you your glass walls weren't really clean?" she teased. He laughed, a real, full laugh. Exactly. The role was more than a promotion. It was a platform, and Clara knew the responsibility it carried. She wasn't just representing herself, she was carrying the voices of every person who had once been invisible. Every hand that kept the company running after the suits went home. And for the first time in years, she wasn't just working to survive. She was working to build spaces, programs, and moments that allowed people to see one another beyond job titles. That, she thought, was worth every sideways glance, every whispered doubt. Because the proof was already in the room. People who had once passed each other without a word were now talking, laughing, sharing ideas. And it was only the beginning. The pushback began as murmurs, carefully worded comments in meetings, polite but pointed. Emails questioning Clara James's scope of influence. But over time, the resistance from certain executives sharpened into something deliberate. Philip Renshaw, the VP of Operations, became the most vocal opponent. In closed-door sessions, he claimed Clara's programs were distracting from core performance metrics and warned that emotional initiatives would dilute the company's competitive edge. Other allies of his framed her work as temporary feel-good gestures that would fade without producing measurable results. Clara knew what they were doing. The goal wasn't just to undermine her, it was to quietly push her out. Then came the meeting request from the board. Evaluation of cultural integration strategy. The phrasing was cold, clinical, but she understood what it meant. Her work, her role, and everything she'd built were on trial. Daniel Carter met her for lunch 2 days before the meeting, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside were charts, engagement reports, retention numbers, all showing improvement since she'd started. "They'll tell you emotions aren't strategy," he said. "Show them why emotion is the reason the strategy works." When the day arrived, Clara entered the boardroom to find 15 executives seated at the long table, every eye on her. The chairperson began formally, "Director James, we'd like you to speak to the long-term viability of this initiative." Clara stood a little straighter. "I'd like to begin with a story," she said. Some shifted uncomfortably. She continued anyway. 20 years ago, my mother cleaned this very building. She didn't have a title or a pension, but she had pride. She used to tell me, even marble gets dull without care. She polished your floors like they were gold." Silence settled over the room. Now, 2 decades later, I stand here not because I climbed quickly, but because I never stopped polishing metaphorically and literally. Culture isn't a decoration, it's maintenance. And when you neglect it, everything else begins to dull. She opened the folder. "Since this initiative began, we've reduced employee turnover by 22%, increased internal promotions of entry-level staff by 35%, and launched 2 mentorship programs, both at full capacity. That's not sentiment. That's structure." Renshaw leaned forward. "And yet, some believe the focus on narrative-based leadership could dilute traditional performance indicators." Clara met his gaze. "Performance isn't only numbers. It's also how many people go home at night believing their work has worth. That belief is what keeps them here, engaged, and delivering results." Another board member, a man in his 60s, asked, "But is it sustainable? What happens when inspiration fades?" "Then we build systems so people don't have to rely on inspiration," Clara replied calmly. "We build belief into policy." She let her words hang in the air before stepping back. She had said what she came to say. No more, no less. The room was still as the chairperson cleared his throat. "Thank you, Director James." That was illuminating. Later that evening, Clara sat in her modest office, the city skyline glowing through the frosted glass. She was exhausted, but steady. Daniel stepped inside carrying a paper bag. "Fried chicken and mashed potatoes," he said, setting it down. "The comfort food of warriors." She managed a small smile. "I'm just tired of proving I belong." Then stop proving, Daniel said, pulling up a chair. You've already changed the room. Now, let them catch up. They ate in quiet companionship, the kind that didn't require small talk. She didn't know what verdict the board would deliver, but she knew she'd face them with both data and dignity. Whatever happened next, Clara wasn't backing down. The numbers were in her favor. The stories were even stronger. And she had no intention of letting either be forgotten. The board's final decision came in a simple email. Strategy will continue under current leadership. Full support confirmed. When Clara James read the words, she let out a slow breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was validation for every person who had trusted her enough to speak up. Daniel Carter appeared in her doorway later that day, a rare grin tugging at his lips. "We're not stopping here," he said, sliding into a chair. "I've been thinking about the community center idea." The lease just went through. The center, tucked into a corner lot of a working-class neighborhood, began as a modest vision, a safe space for after-school programs, tutoring, and job readiness workshops. But once Clara stepped inside the dusty shell of the building, her mind started layering in details: bright reading corners, a kitchen for shared meals, a small garden out back. She poured herself into the project. After her workdays at the company, she'd head to the site, with Eli, her son, in tow. He'd run around the open rooms with other kids while she reviewed volunteer rosters, and met with local partners. Daniel was there almost every evening, not in a suit but in rolled-up sleeves, helping paint walls or haul donated furniture. The first mural went up in the main hall, a sprawling tree with deep roots and branches that stretched across the ceiling. At the base, in small letters, was the quote Clara had once told Daniel: "Even marble gets dull without care." When the doors opened to the public, the energy was electric. Families came for hot meals. Children discovered shelves of donated books. And teens found mentors to help with college applications. Clara greeted each person at the door as if welcoming them into her own home. Word began to spread, not just in the neighborhood, but inside the company. Employees who had once dismissed her role now visited the center and saw the impact firsthand. A finance manager started volunteering on Saturdays to teach budgeting workshops. A cafeteria worker brought trays of homemade food for the after-school program. The ripple effect was undeniable. Daniel began referencing the center in executive meetings, framing it as an example of how investing in people's dignity yields measurable benefits. "We're not just improving morale," he told the board. "We're building loyalty, resilience, and leadership from the ground up." Clara noticed changes within the company, too. Departments began hosting cross-level lunches. Supervisors scheduled flexible shifts for parents without making them feel like they were asking for favors. Employees from different floors, people who'd never spoken before, started greeting each other in the halls. One afternoon, as Clara tended to the small garden behind the center, Eli called over a boy standing shyly near the fence. His name was Jaden, and he lived in a nearby shelter. Over the weeks, he returned often, sometimes to help plant flowers, sometimes just to sit in the reading corner. It reminded Clara that change didn't always come through speeches or policy memos. Sometimes it came in the form of a child finding a safe patch of ground to return to. The local newspaper ran a feature on the center, calling it a quiet revolution in the Goals neighborhood. The headline embarrassed Clara, but when she saw the photo of Eli handing Jaden a book, she felt a swell of pride that went deeper than any title she'd earned. Daniel, too, seemed changed. At company town halls, he spoke less about profits and more about values. He began pushing for a cross-community apprenticeship initiative, pairing youth from underserved neighborhoods with mentors inside the company. "We're not just building workers," he told the board. "We're building legacies." When the first group of apprentices toured the corporate headquarters, Clara was there to greet them. She watched their eyes widen at the glass walls and polished floors, remembering how she'd once felt invisible in those same halls. This time, she was the one making introductions, ensuring they knew they belonged. One evening, after a long day at the center, Clara and Daniel sat on the steps out front as the last of the volunteers left. The street lamps cast a soft glow on the new sign above the door. Rosewood Community Hub. "You know," Daniel said quietly, "none of this would exist if you hadn't believed it could." Clara shook her head. "It exists because a lot of people decided to care at the same time." She glanced toward the garden where Eli and Jaden had been playing earlier. "And because once you see someone's worth, you can't unsee it." In that moment, she realized the work was far from finished. But the shift had already begun inside the company, in the community, and in the way people understood the value of those who had once been overlooked. And maybe, she thought, that was how real change happened. Not in one sweeping moment, but in countless small ones, building on each other until the world you see looks entirely different. Winter had settled over the city, draping the streets in frost and stringing the rooftops with warm holiday lights. Inside the community hub, the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee mingled with the sound of a jazz quartet setting up in the main hall. Volunteers bustled between tables lined with potluck dishes, and children darted between clusters of chatting adults. Clara James stood near the doorway, greeting guests with a smile that carried both pride and disbelief. The center had grown beyond anything she'd imagined: 3 after-school programs, a mentorship network, free parent workshops, and even a community garden. It had become not just a building, but a beating heart for the neighborhood. Halfway through the evening, Daniel Carter took the small stage, microphone in hand. His tuxedo was simple, but his voice carried the steady confidence of a man speaking from conviction. "A year ago," he began, "I walked into this company pretending to be someone I wasn't. I wanted to see it through fresh eyes. I didn't expect to meet someone who would change not just the company, but my life." The room quieted, all eyes on him. "Clara James," Daniel said, turning toward her, "your grit, your grace, and your unshakable belief in the dignity of people have become the blueprint for everything we've done since. This place exists because you reminded us what leadership really means. So tonight, this center will be renamed the Rose Carter Center for Dignity and Opportunity." Gasps rose from the crowd, followed by a wave of applause that seemed to swell from the ground. Floorboards. Clara froze, her hands covering her mouth. The sound around her blurred, and for a moment she was back on the night shift, mop in hand, unseen by everyone but one man who had looked her in the eye and listened. Daniel gestured for her to join him on stage. She walked slowly, feeling hands pat her shoulders, hearing murmured congratulations. When she reached him, he offered his hand. She took it, her voice trembling as she faced the audience. "I don't know what to say except thank you," she began. "Not just for this name, but for believing in me when I'd almost forgotten how to believe in myself." Her gaze swept the room. "This center isn't just about me. It's about every parent who's worked 2 jobs and still came home with a smile. Every kid who's felt invisible. Every neighbor who shared their last dollar. This building holds all of us." The applause came again, this time with a few tears in the crowd. In the corner, Eli beamed, clapping so hard his hands turned red. Later, when the music picked up again, and people returned to eating and laughing, Clara slipped to the large front window. Snowflakes drifted under the lamplight, each one vanishing as it hit the warm glass. Daniel joined her, hands in his pockets. "Still surreal?" he asked. "Feels like I'm going to wake up back in that old apartment with the leaky sink," she said, with a small laugh. "You're not dreaming," he replied. "You built this. We built this. And we're just getting started." Eli appeared beside them, leaning into Clara's side, his eyelids heavy. "Can we stay here? Forever?" he asked. "We might not live in this building forever," Clara said, brushing his hair back. "But what we've built here will always be a part of us." Over the next weeks, the Rose Carter Center for Dignity and Opportunity became a symbol, far beyond the neighborhood. Local news outlets ran features on its programs. Other cities called to ask how to replicate its model. Even inside the company, the tone shifted. Frontline employees walked a little taller, executives spoke more carefully about corporate culture, and new hires were told the story of the janitor who had become a director. For Clara, the most profound moments were still the quiet ones. Jaden, the boy from the U23 shelter, reading aloud to younger kids in the corner. Eugene, the night janitor, stopping by after his shift just to have coffee with the staff. Parents who once hesitated to ask for help now volunteering to lead workshops. One afternoon, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a photo her mother, years ago, in her janitor's uniform, standing next to a gleaming conference table. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Some shine more than marble ever could." She placed it in a frame next to Eli's crayon drawing of Mommy at work helping people. Side by side, the 2 images told the same story, one in black and white, the other in bright color of resilience turned into legacy. Looking around the center that evening, Clara realized she no longer measured her life in what she had survived, but in what she had built. And here, in this building bearing her name, her story had become a part of something larger, something that would keep growing long after the snow outside melted into spring. True worth isn't stamped on a business card, stitched into a uniform, or locked behind an office door. It's something deeper, quieter. It's found in the late nights when no one is watching, in the hands that keep working long after others have gone home, in the steady voice that offers kindness when it's least expected. Clara James's journey proved that a person's dignity is not tied to a title, salary, or corner office. For years, she was overlooked, passed in the hallway without a second glance, her work dismissed as routine. Yet through persistence, compassion, and the courage to stand for what mattered, she became the catalyst for change, not just in one company, but in an entire community. Her story reminds us that the quiet strength of a single person can ignite transformation. Clara didn't demand recognition. She earned it by consistently showing up with integrity. She turned moments of invisibility into opportunities to see others, to listen, to create spaces where people felt valued regardless of their role. And in doing so, she left a mark that no policy or profit margin could erase. It's easy to measure people by their outward success, to judge their value based on the surface. But the truth is, the most enduring legacies are built by those who keep their humanity intact in the face of challenges, people who lift others as they rise, who plant seeds of dignity in places where it's been forgotten. Your value is not determined by the position you hold, but by the compassion, integrity, and positive impact you bring to the lives around you. The world may overlook quiet strength, but it is often the very force that holds everything together. If you carry yourself with dignity, even in the smallest tasks, you are already shaping a better future for yourself and for those who follow. If Clara's journey moved you, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life has gone unseen for too long? Share their story, honor their work, and remind them they matter. Leave a comment below with the name of someone who inspires you, and let's create a space where every voice is heard. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can keep telling stories that shine a light on the people who truly make the world turn.